Hi, horror movie explainer here. Today I'm going to explain a thriller movie named 10 by 10. So let's begin. Kathy visits a restaurant for breakfast one morning, unknown to her that she's being watched by a man named Lewis, sitting in the same restaurant. She is attended to by Dennis, whom she gives flowers for his pregnant wife. A while later, Lewis walks casually out of the restaurant by Kathy's table to wait in his car for her at the park. Kathy doesn't know him, obviously. Kathy finishes afterward and leaves the restaurant. With Lewis secretly following her, she drives off to her yoga lessons. While she is inside, Lewis goes to pack her things from her car. After her yoga class, when Kathy is about to get into her car, Lewis attacks her with a plastic bag. She manages to get him off, but since he is a little stronger, he eventually pins her down. She screams, but the closest person to the scene has on headphones. After tying her up and taping her mouth, Lewis takes her in his trunk to a remote house where he then locks her up in a padded 10 by 10 room. A secret room in a secret house, making it a bit tough to locate. After explaining to her that she need not waste her time screaming because she's in a soundproof room, he untapes her mouth and demands her name. Kathy starts screaming instead and Lewis leaves her alone. Seeing him leave, she tries her best to break out of the room, but to no avail. She later sees the room's vent and screams through it, hoping that someone outside with a good sense of hearing might find out. Unfortunately for her, the house is solitary as earlier said, and no one will ever hear her. Lewis returns minutes later, asking if she would rather continue screaming for help than know why she is being held hostage. Thinking he's only trying to take advantage of her, Kathy offers him $50,000 savings and begs him not to touch her. It is ridiculous to think that she made that much money selling flowers, Lewis says. And sadly, he doesn't want her money. As for what he wants, Lewis shows her a loaded pistol, then he requests her name again. Out of fear, she tells him she's Kathy Newland and he angrily leaves, switching off the lights. Later, Lewis goes to prepare lunch in the kitchen, and meanwhile, Kathy forces her bound hands in front of her so that when Lewis enters the room to get her for lunch, she attacks him and attempts to flee. First, she tries to use the landline, but Lewis catches up with her and destroys the phone. She tricks him and then knocks him out, after which she grabs a knife to cut herself loose and also steals a cell to make a phone call, but later discovers that there is no network service in the house. After that, she attempts to break out of the house but can't, as she can't break through the glass. Lewis wakes up soon and invites Kathy to lunch, using the gun for control. He demands her name once again, but Kathy asks him who he is, trying to figure him out. He asks her again, and this time she calmly tells him it's Kathy Newland. Hearing this, Lewis hits her hard with a plate. However, Kathy hits him in turn and the gun drops from his hand. The two then begin to struggle, with Kathy eventually pinning him down. When she tries to reach for the gun in a bid to gain control, Lewis knocks her out and takes her back inside the cell. A car arrives in the meantime, but the driver does not notice anything unusual. It is Lewis's maid arriving for work that day, but Lewis asks her to leave. But before she does leave, she realizes the mess in the building and also notices that Lewis is bleeding. She might suspect something and go on to call the cops, who knows? Lewis later cleans up the mess, making everything return to the way it was. He also attends to Kathy to fix her up. After watching news footage concerning the unnatural deaths of 3 patients at a hospital 4 years ago, Lewis goes back to Kathy to continue interrogating her. This time, she frankly tells him she is Kathy, born February 15th in Orange County, California, and schooled at Fairbridge High School before college at NYU to study English, after which she worked in a library for a few years and later opened her flower business in Atlanta. She says she wasn't raised in the church when Lewis asks, and that she didn't have any siblings. Her parents are divorced, she continues, and her mother is a retired nurse while her father worked as a doctor for a football team called the Detroit Lions. Lewis wonders how she was then born in California while her dad worked for the Detroit Lions, which is the opposing team. He concludes that nearly everything she said was a lie, as he has been watching her for months. Then he starts the interrogation all over again. First, he asks her where she was born and Kathy keeps telling him California. Lewis is then forced to fire a bullet very close to her, promising that the next bullet would be going into her head. He asks her the same question again, and this time, she tells him Green Bay, Wisconsin, where she attended East Star High School and was raised as a good church girl together with her twin sister. Also, after their father left their mother for a cheerleader for the team he worked for, her twin sister eliminated herself. More so, Lewis knows she didn't study English like she claimed and also never took any library job, and she admits to this, revealing that she rather studied medicine, nursing precisely. Pleased to hear all that, Lewis then asks her what he calls the biggest piece of the puzzle, her real name. She claims as before that it is Kathy, but Lewis knows it's not, disclosing that Kathy was her dead sister's name, not hers. When Kathy, or whoever she is, doesn't respond quickly enough, Lewis fires his pistol to scare her into confessing. She breaks down and then admits that she isn't Kathy, but Natalie Ann Stevens. Once the air is cleared, Lewis leaves her alone in the room to figure out the reason she's being held up, assuming that she already knows. Natalie then continues to find her way out of the room by scraping around a floor tile and attempting to pull it out with her fingers. She gives up soon enough and goes instead to make an emergency phone call with the cell she stole during the fight, hoping there'd be network service through the vent. The 911 call goes through, although unstable, and she quickly leaves a message for the police to trace the call. Meanwhile, Lewis, who's emotionally watching footage of his wife and daughter, suddenly finds out that Kathy has taken the phone and rushes to her cell to take it from her. Trembling, he continues the interrogation, and it turns out that Natalie worked as a nurse at a hospital where 3 patients died 4 years ago, one of whom was Lewis's wife. Lewis accuses her of killing them, but Natalie says the hospital nurses have been placed on trial and acquitted when nothing was found on them. But Lewis asks her then why she changed her identity after the incident. Natalie says it was because she needed a fresh start after the trial ruined her life. Lewis says he believed the excuse at first until he started to notice a few things afterward. First was that his wife's wedding ring was missing when she was found lifeless, and he knows firstly that she never took it off. The second was another patient said to have died of organ failure even after passing his medical exam a month earlier. Natalie claims that the patient died of undiagnosed kidney disease. The last is that Lewis's wife was drunk, and he is very certain that she wouldn't have drunk that much. Also, her blood was full of a substance that made her vulnerable to being violated. Natalie apologizes for Lewis's loss, but he knows she doesn't feel sorry. He tells her that he didn't abduct her because he thinks she killed his wife, but because he knows she did. What he wants is a good explanation from her as to why she did, and threatens to terminate her if she doesn't. Then he leaves her for a few minutes and returns with a gun to her head, very angry. Natalie admits out of fear and promises to tell him everything. Then she confesses that it all started after her sister's demise, having vowed to be of service to people in a bid to keep her loyalty to her sister. So while she worked as a nurse, patients would confide in her and tell her very dark secrets about the bad things they had done. When Mrs. Lewis was her patient, Natalie says she wasn't wearing her wedding ring because she was seeing another man, and that she was drunk in a hotel bar, without a single ID on her when she collapsed. Natalie accuses her of being a sinner and admits to terminating her. Lewis finds this very hard to take in and leaves the cell. He later returns to her cell to tell her she didn't have the right to get rid of his wife. As a result, he asks her to turn herself in. Just then, Natalie stabs him with a piece of metal, saying she's Kathy, and won't give up her life for him. Then she runs to the living room to look for the gun. She finds it soon, and Lewis tries to take it from her in a struggle. Alondra arrives at that time with Lewis's daughter Summer, and Natalie shoots her. Next, she grabs Summer and holds her at gunpoint, promising to eliminate her and end everything since the cops will arrive soon. Lewis begs her to not shoot Summer, but she responds that she is not his child, that he was betrayed. He pleads with her and promises that she doesn't need to turn herself in and that he won't say anything to the cops. When Natalie doesn't believe him, Lewis tells her the house is recording everything she said, distracting her and asking Summer to run after biting her. Just then, he knocks the gun out of her hand and squeezes her neck until she passes out. She gets up again and Lewis shoots her. After that, he grabs his daughter and attempts to make a run for it away from the compound, after taking the recording from the computer, but later realizes Natalie's not dead. Natalie later points a gun at him in the garage, attempting to shoot him, but the pistol is sadly empty and Lewis hits her. After a long fight, Natalie gets him to the floor and attempts to stab him with a pitchfork, but he manages to hit her instead. She falls, knocking out the garage door support, and it drops on her, rendering her unconscious. Lewis refuses to admit that Summer isn't his child, carrying her in his hands while the police approach the scene.